So welcome everyone for this session on private cities, rethinking urban development through market-driven models. And we've got a very great panel before us. I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Kon Osendo, based here in Nairobi. I'm a governance and political economy consultant with South Consulting, and previously a governance advisor with FCDO of the UK government. Then, I don't know if I just introduce you guys quick or you introduce yourselves. Just say, yeah, from my left, just introduce yourselves.
So hi everyone, I'm Peter Young. I work for the Free Cities Foundation, which is a non-profit organisation that promotes the development of self-governing zones across the world.
Hi everyone, my name is Muya Musoko Twane. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tebe Investment Management, which is the developer of the Nkwashi estate in Zambia. We're builders of cities as well as rural estates.
Good afternoon everybody, my name is Willie Vos. I'm the CEO of Waterfall City Management Company. For those of you who don't know, it's located in South Africa between Johannesburg and Pretoria, halfway more or less. It's about 5,400 acres, and it's a mixed-use development.
And good afternoon, everybody. My name is Martin Rama. For 30 years with the World Bank, including as regional chief economist for South Asia and Latin America and the Caribbean. Still working with the World Bank on partnerships, public-private partnership for large-scale urban development, building on work on private cities that we did before.
Thank you very much. I'm told that for those who attended the Tattoo City breakfast, which I missed because of something else in town, was a very relevant kind of going deeper into a lot of questions that would really apply with this panel. And regrettably I missed that. But basically we want to have a conversation around understanding the motivations behind creating private cities, the governance structures, the impact on socioeconomic development and social equity, the role that they could play in national development strategies, and of course what the future is for urban planning with this city. So I think the stories and the insights and the lessons that we will learn from each of these gentlemen today should give us insights around that. The approach that I'd want to take is to give each of them a guided question that allows them, one, to talk about their work as they also answer the question that I ask in about 5-6 minutes each, so that we can have them combine both telling us about what they've done or achieved and also responding to some of the salient questions that are emerging around private cities. And then I'd like to give us a bit more time from the audience to ask any questions to them so that they may also have time to respond to some of your emerging queries. So I will start with Willie Vos, Waterfall City, which is in Gauteng. Is that how to pronounce it?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right, Gauteng province in South Africa. What factors have drove you to build Waterfall City, and what are the key determinants of its success?
The first part was that it is a large tract of land. It was used to be agricultural land, and it's a very strategic section. So we realized that if we were not going to develop it, somebody else would tell us what to do. So we decided to do the urban design ourselves and basically be in control of our own destiny. The things that I think helped us to be successful is we've spent a lot of time on detailed urban design and traffic and a proper holistic traffic impact assessment. And we are very protective of that plan of ours. We planned there's a lot of detail that has gone into it. We also did a lot of research on specifically who will be the people that we are building the city for. A lot of demographic studies, but also looking at the generations. We know that the millennials are already in charge, but soon it will be the Zs and later on the Alpha. So we did a lot of research on what is required for the future generations, not leaving behind the current and the older generations. Then we also had a lot of deep planning in terms of control, city management aspects, that we basically assumed that the city of Johannesburg or the government won't be able to assist us. And we created bodies, management companies around us to be able to maintain infrastructure, although we are still dependent on the city of Johannesburg for water and Eskom for electricity, which is a problem. And I could advise anybody who starts a new development, when you assume that you are doing this development, just assume the government will never help you. And if they do, it's a bonus. But so we have planned for that in quite some detail. And then also the bulk infrastructure, there was a lot of planning that went into that, making sure that the roads, the stormwater, as well as the telecoms, together with electricity and sewer and water is sorted out. It took us the better part of 8 years to make sure that all of that was in place. Together with that, there was a proper environmental impact assessment. And we also designed, maybe one step back to the urban design, we made sure that the contours through the land surveying exercise that we've gone through, that it makes sense to develop, for example, residential in areas where it's a little bit more flat, instead of it, when it's a very steep incline, because it makes it quite expensive in some cases, especially if you're looking at the lower end of the market. And then we also had a holistic and detailed smart city planning. We decided quite early that we have to go digital. Smart metering, connectivity is an extremely important thing. The use of data is extremely valuable for us at the moment, to use metadata in helping us to take our decisions. And in the South African context, security is a big thing, so we spend a lot of time on making sure that we have the right infrastructure as far as security is concerned. We have face recognition, for example, and a lot of camera surveillance, and for that you need bandwidth and surveillance to be done together with people on the ground. And then the last thing is we've spent a lot of time on getting good management. Sometimes young but very clever people, and the main thing for us is that all our management bought into what we want to achieve. So, for example, if the finance person drives on the road and they see somebody's digging, they'll ask the question, who's digging? Because we don't know, if it's somebody busy stealing a cable or not, so that we are aware of what's going on in our environment. So, and then I think the one other aspect that we must admit is that in the greater Johannesburg, Pretoria environment, we were very fortunate with the location. It's a sought after area, and it's also easy to access it from the main national road. We had relatively good road infrastructure around us, which I know in some of the cases, it's a very difficult thing to start with if you don't have all of that infrastructure close to you. I would say in a nutshell, that's more or less, to sum it up, where we are.
Lovely. That's a lot of work you guys have put in there, and a critical lesson there. Assume that the government won't help you. That's something that we could tackle. Muya, similarly, with Nkwashi, what was your inspiration behind its development, and especially as a hub for Zambia's emerging middle class? But one of the things we'd want to hear from you is how has your focus on Nkwashi as a cultural hub shaped its development?
Thanks for asking those questions. Those are good questions. So I think we started off from a fairly, I don't say agnostic, but agnostic perspective, in the sense that we had a tract of land that we owned, and we're thinking about the best and highest use of that land. There was no specific vision to begin with. It was, what is the best use of this tract of land? And that's remained a consistent approach to executing projects. We don't necessarily focus on mixed use per se, whether it's residential, commercial, or anything else. We think about what the best case is with a particular tract. So for instance, in our portfolio, we have forest land, we have energy projects, we are looking at Nkwashi also. So it's the same thesis across the board. Now, in this particular instance, what we did is we surveyed sort of like demographic studies. And Zambia is a very urbanizing jurisdiction. The population growth is very rapid. There was an inbuilt housing deficit that is only growing. And so there's a vector that supported doing something that addresses these problems. In addition to that, we were fairly close to Lusaka, which is the capital of Zambia. So it made sense to do something that captures residential and creates a sort of like a commuter city. That being said, we're also a bit of a distance away from Lusaka in that people wouldn't be able to use the existing amenities that would typically be available to them if they were much closer. So as a consequence of that, we had to think about building a lot of those amenities ourselves. And so that informed our master planning sort of like thesis. So schooling, for instance, would have to be considered. Healthcare would have to be considered. Recreation would have to be considered. Retail would have to be considered. So instead of being just a simple settlement, it ended up being a small town in its own right. And so that's basically what ended up informing our vision for Nkwashi, which is we want to have a place where people can live, learn, work, and play. And we want to address many of the issues that exist in Lusaka that people would typically want addressed, but as Willie said, are not addressed by the public sector. So in our case, for instance, a simple fix for some of these things would be something as innocuous as building a public park. You know, a place where people can take their kids to play. A public lake is another one. In Lusaka, you don't get a lot of these type of spaces. Now, speaking to your question about culture, that sort of is addressed in there. So one of the things that we did with partners of ours who are actually here, I don't know if Sid is here, but we built a artist in residence program to develop public artwork. So we ended up building a lot of sculptures that we placed around the city, sort of murals. We created steelies around the various suburbs. So each suburb would have its own feel. Each street, for instance, has its own murals. And that just adds a little bit of flavor that would be typically absent from a streetscape. We also have hosted things like hackers in residence programs to have software developers come and live in the city and sort of add that sort of cultural essence to it. We've hosted events like festivals, for instance, food festivals, arts festivals. We've hosted canoe sprints. So we've hosted a boating club. So we're trying to build out this sort of unique culture where people can sort of play. You know, it's kind of like the ethos we're going for. In addition to that, we're building a school, as I mentioned, and that then adds a different character to it, especially because the school is itself focused on enabling kids to learn by exploration. So they sort of like use the city as a landscape for learning. So those are some of the elements that we've done, that we've adopted to make the place more than another bland suburb.
Interesting, and moving to Martin, as a scholar, when you listen to Waterfall and Nkwashi, but I know you studied private cities quite a lot. What would you? Why do you think there's been an explosion of development of private cities, and especially in the areas you have studied, the developing world and emerging markets? And what's been the driving force, in your view, behind their successes and failures?
Thank you. The reason why we focused on private cities when we started this project, this analytical project at the World Bank, is this tension that we see in the regions where most of the urbanization of the world will be happening in the coming decades, also having some of the capacity to manage that urbanization. And I'm not referring to human capacity, but basically to institutional capacity. In many of the developing countries where urbanization is proceeding very fast, and the African continent is one of them, you have these overlaps between different institutions. You have municipalities that cannot raise revenue to do the necessary investments. And so the concern was, sure, the high road is to fix the capacity, institutional, technical, financial, of local governments to handle this process. But if that takes 2-3 decades, we will end up with a very messy urbanization. And then retrofitting cities so that they are really productive will be very difficult. And given this tension between the urbanization needs and the limited capacity, we are seeing everywhere in South Asia, in East Asia, in Sub-Saharan Africa, in the Middle East and North Africa, the emergence of large urban developments. I'm not talking about neighborhoods or gated communities, but examples like Waterfall City, so relatively large scale, where a private actor is playing a leading role. And so we started by studying, we did inventories of these, we call private cities when there is a very large actor playing a significant role. We did inventories of these private cities in 4 countries. We found that there are dozens of them. Admittedly, we chose large countries, but there are many of them. We did detailed case studies of 14 of them, including the fascinating case of Waterfall City, one of the cases we cover in the African continent. And along the way, we learned that these cities are different from the cities done by local authorities in some important ways. And I want to emphasize 3 ways. The first one, sorry, perhaps I would claim is not the most important one, is the point that the charter cities movement has been emphasizing. And that's having much better governance in the sense that, okay, if I do business in this city, if I have a problem with the courts, I can go to London. And if I'm exporting and I have problem in customs, in fact, my customs are run by Switzerland. That's the idea behind charter cities. You import institutions to one location. We don't see much of that. We see fiscal advantages in the spirit of industrial zones, special economic zones. We see a much stronger emphasis on security, as you mentioned, for Waterfall, but we don't see a big institutional difference. On the other hand, we see much better planning. There's a much better integration of planning functions, service delivery. So we see what someone in the case of Pakistan described as well-functioning cities in non-functioning states. I'm caricaturing, but there was something of that. And then the third element where these cities are different, quite generally, not everywhere, but quite generally, is that they put a strong focus on their economic model. In urban planning tradition, one builds the city and businesses come, and households come. There's a neutrality that economists like a lot, because we're very skeptical about picking winners of any sort. But what we see is that many of these private cities have actors who are very strategic on how they see the business of the city and who plan the city in function of that business. The most extreme case is probably one large developer in China, China Fortune Land Development, whose motto is business first. So they start thinking about the city from the kind of business that there will be in the city. So there are these 3 big differences that say, oh, so here there is a lot of potential. Now, what we are working on now is 2 questions. One is, why is that we don't see more of this? And I want to say 2 words about that. And the other is, not all is perfect in the cities. In some cases, we see environmental issues. Not in all. Some of these private cities cater to a high-end middle class, and so greenery is part of the value proposition, and we see some of them winning awards for the greenery. But the ones that are more catering to economic activity can be not so good when it comes to pollution, rivers, and things like that. We see social segregation with two sides of it. One is, of course, you have the neat and well-functioning private city, and you have the messy other city outside. On the other hand, these cities create a lot of jobs. So they create a lot of mobility, upward mobility. So you have segregation and mobility. So the second point is what needs to be done to address these potential downfalls. But it's the first one that attracts most of our attention because it's something we have been discussing in the sessions in this excellent summit, which is why is that so few big private investors are interested in this. And it's because of the risks, because the risks are very high. This is something that works over a long period of time. Before a city creates value, you have to build it, you have to put a lot of sunk capital, and that creates enormous opportunities, enormous incentives for opportunistic behavior. You put the city now, you don't get the city or you don't get the revenue. There's a lot of asymmetric information. What is the government doing? You refer to relying on the utilities that they promise you or not. Same concern from the government. How much of the cost the private player is telling me is having a real, how much effort is going into this. And so what we're working on now in the new phase of this research, this more analytical work, is the kind of design, of institutional design that can address these concerns. One will imagine, oh, PPPs, public-private partnerships, are the solution. But we don't see many of them. We see some in China, but we don't see many of them. And there are very good reasons why this doesn't happen. Incentive compatibility, information asymmetry, moral hazard, you can name it. But we see many other creative arrangements. We see joint ventures between the public and the private sector. We see land concessions. We see the sale of the rights to the city. We see the sale of air in some cases. In Latin America, instead of land, you sell the air so that people can build up. So what we're working on is on the type of contractual arrangements that could address the potential shortcomings, could complement the traditional urbanization and give us some more of these cities that will be so much needed, especially the ones that have a very strong, very clear business model to make them viable. And we are trying to learn in which circumstances different institutional arrangements work better. Where is that you will say, don't even try this because it will not work, and where you will say, okay, this may be a good solution. And that's a project we are currently embarked in.
Thank you very much, Martin. And you know, finishing up with Peter Young, Free Cities Foundation, a leading voice on worldwide development of private cities. When you listen to the models that we've heard from our colleagues here, Waterfall City and Kwashi, and listening to some of the insights that Martin has given us, give us your experience from, first, your approach as Free Cities Foundation. And it sounds more advocacy, but you could break it down for us. But draw a bit from your own experience in Beijing, when you were with the UK's Department for International Trade, yeah. And you know, give us some insights around that. Your approach as Free Cities Foundation in advocating for private cities development, but draw some lessons from your time at Beijing.
Sure, yeah. So what we advocate at the Free Cities Foundation is essentially a certain kind of private city. We call them free cities because the focus within our zones is that there should be a high degree of freedom for individual residents to opt in to the system. So we're voluntarists and we believe that all systems should be consensual. And there's also a high degree of freedom for the individual city developer. So we like the idea that within a country there can be a fairly high degree of regulatory flexibility in order to set new rules and try out new systems to work out what works best. So I would essentially say that there are three core pillars to what makes a free city as we advocate it. The first is the kind of land that the city is developed on. So we generally advocate that it's developed on greenfield or otherwise undeveloped land. And the reason for that is that it avoids conflicts with potential residents. Essentially what we want to do is introduce some innovations in governance that we think can be greatly beneficial, but we want to avoid a situation where there are existing residents that are being kind of forced into a zones regime. We want to take an area of land that's undeveloped and then create a system that's attractive so people voluntarily opt in by voting with their feet and moving. The second thing I would point to is the private governance aspect, which is the subject of this panel. So we're big believers that a lot can be achieved through private governance. We think that creates some great incentives for governments to think more like service providers. Because ultimately, the things that you require from your government, whether it's functioning water, electricity, infrastructure, these things can be thought of as services. And we think that the incentive model of having a developer that tries to attract new customers that generate the revenue is a good one because it drives up standards. So we very much advocate the kind of private governance model. And I think we saw this morning, for those of you who are at the Tartu City Breakfast, some great examples of how that's being put into place here in Kenya. And the third core pillar, I'd say, is some degree of regulatory or legal autonomy. So there are some private cities across Africa which are governed by a private entity, but they don't necessarily have any sort of regulatory flexibility. And that's one of the things we're really interested in at the Free Cities Foundation. For those of you that heard Magat Wade's excellent presentation yesterday in the main hall, she gave a bit of an overview of why she thinks that having a blank slate sometimes within a country in order to come up with new regulations and new rules, new tax codes, can be a really beneficial thing. Sometimes the existing system is really hard to reform from within, and so it might be in the interests both of the national government and the developer coming in to sort of start with a blank slate and be able to look around the world to see where the best regulations are in place. You might want to look for a financial regulation from Dubai or some business regulation from Singapore, and then kind of tweak those to local conditions. So a free city in the sort of proper sense of the word would fulfill all of those conditions. And this is really quite an emerging movement. Our organization hosts a conference in Prague every year, and we had last year about 20 different projects. A lot of these are very early stage and quite aspirational, people that aspire to gain some special economics zone status later on. But I think the two zones that really do sort of encompass the idea most accurately are the zones for employment and economic development in Honduras, so Ciudad Morazan and Prospera. These are two projects that have been in existence about 5 or 6 years, and they're already starting to show on a small scale that you can gain some great benefits from advocating the principles that we do at the Free Cities Foundation. They've certainly faced some challenges along the way, but there's more and more exciting stuff coming in the pipeline. Some of you might have heard my colleague Alex Voss yesterday speak about a new opportunity in Brunei that we think is going to tick those 3 boxes pretty successfully as well. So that's what we advocate. And just to follow up on your final thing on China, I did live in China prior to taking on this role at the Free Cities Foundation. I spent 10 years over there, and I became deeply interested in the story of how China was able to develop in the 1980s through special economic zones. Mark gave a very good overview of that in his opening remarks yesterday. The story of how Shenzhen served as this really powerful test bed for trying out market reforms, and these reforms were then rolled out across the whole of China to great benefit. So yeah, I think that there's lots of experiences we can look at internationally, particularly from China, and we can learn from and refine and come up with even better models in the future.
Thank you very much, Peter. I want to go to the congregation, the audience gathered here. Do we have a roving mic, or we'll just use one of these mics we have here, one of these? All right. How many questions do you have from the floor? Do you have any questions from the floor? All right, I see a few hands. Let me see again. 1, 2, just start the two gentlemen, and if you have a question directed to any of the panelists, please specify that, or if it's a general question, that's also okay.
Thank you for that good presentation on private cities. My name is John Kithinji. I work for a company that provides water solutions. And one of the challenges that I would want to hear how you guys are handling is the issue of water. Because many times we find post-development, many of these projects face a lot of issues with water because water is never is not well thought out at the conceptual stage. So you have probably a lot of abstraction from the boreholes, and then after 10, 20 years, they run dry. There is no way of recharging these systems that have been put in place in the design phase. So I would like to just know, in this private city, how are you countering that issue of water, especially in the era of climate change? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hello. Very interesting presentation, I must say. So I guess the question that I have would go, or rather I'd ask each and every one of you. Something we've noticed, at least over the past few years, is how people interact within their urban environments has really changed over the past few years. So what are you guys doing, at least in your respective developments? What are you guys doing to really anticipate and future-proof some of your developments against, let's say, the needs of the future generations, considering we may not really be able to understand or properly comprehend what they may need and some of the requirements in a few years to come. So what are you doing to actually future-proof some of your developments?
Thank you very much. Any other question? Let me take, if the panel doesn't mind, let me take those two more, and then, and you introduce yourself, and then you direct your question.
Yeah, my name is Henry Chieng. I work for the Kenya Alliance of Resident Associations. There's a question the moderator asked, and I was keen to hear the response. And I want to put across my own response and see if you'll agree with me. The issue of private, you asked why is there a boom of private cities, especially in emerging markets, emerging countries? Could it be because the government has failed to provide services that they're supposed to provide? And so private cities seems to be providing those solutions people are looking for, and now running away from the government failure. So can we say that we have more private cities coming up because of the government failure to provide the services that are needed? And could also this be a case of prescribing private solutions to public problems? And I really want to hear from you. I think it's Martin. Yeah, because I think that's the question was asked to you. So I just want to, it's a theory I'm putting across, so I just want to see if it could be something that is really making sense in terms of response. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Henry. And the last one, I will do another round if there's time, but let's have the last question now.
Yeah, my name is Maeko Kabongo from Zambia. I'm working with a private developer. We're doing a greenfield project. I think my comment is closely related with what Henry had talked about. I just need to understand from your end how you handling the issue of inclusivity, in that the people you are attracting in here are able to afford, but they will have people working for them as either housekeepers, gardeners, and others who definitely would not afford to live in this city. How are you handling that issue of avoiding getting close to your new developed city, informal settlement or unplanned development on the other side? And how are you integrating social housing in your project?
Thank you very much. All right. Wow, tough ones. Gentlemen, who spoke last?
I can take one on water.
All right, let's do, okay, fine. So I'd like the two projects we have represented here, Waterfall and Kwashi, speak specifically on the issue of water supply and how you're handling that. I think I kind of had elements of it in your presentations, but break it down for the gentleman who's asked the question. But also touch on future-proofing your projects. I think it would be good for us to know how does the next generation benefit or plug in to this. But I also know that the issue around private solutions for public problems is one that maybe that'll come up there. But I would want Martin to touch on that, especially the theory of that. But you guys can also touch on the practical aspects of it. But Martin, give us a theory around that. Is this, are we just prescribing private solutions to public problems? And is this just a focus of having a lot of these cities coming up in the global south? And you'll also touch on that, especially the social housing they're talking about. All right, very good. From you, going that way.
I think that question on water is actually very important. I actually don't often hear that, and I think I'm quite pleased to have heard it. In our case, that was part of our master planning. And what we did to resolve that is we built 2 large water reservoirs, so lakes. We dammed 2 rivers and built the first of the 2 dams to conserve rainwater. And then in addition to that, we then abstract that water from these large reservoirs and then move it through the places it has to go through a water reticulation network to homesteads and commercial spaces. The same is done for solid waste as well as wastewater. So the same way that we would plan for our electricity grid, we plan for water and for sewage. In our case, we couldn't rely on any council water because there is no council water. We're 35 Ks out of Lusaka, and so would have to cater to ourselves. That being said, I generally think that that's probably the best model to use, but it will vary from place to place. We're fortunate that our site has enough undulations, rivers, and valleys to enable us to actually build out our own dams. So that's how we resolved that.
In our case, as far as water is concerned, we do not have that luxury. We don't have dams, so we can't. We don't really have alternative sources of water, except that what we do then do is to manage it very carefully. You can, if you can't increase the supply, you have to manage the consumption, and we do that through smart metering. We have over the last few years seen that people change their behavior. If you have line of sight of what's happening on an app with your water consumption, people start using the water differently. As far as our buildings are concerned, we've got smart metering there, pick up leaks and so on quite early. We also have rainwater harvesting programs. We do drill, but as the gentleman said, that's not a sustainable solution because the water table just drops if everyone starts sinking boreholes. And then we also assist our local government in helping them to build, or upgrade some pipes and build reservoirs. And then in the last instance is also to use black water treatment plants and even grey water treatment plants. We've introduced now black water treatment plants where it comes to we've got swimming pools and some other amenities in our environment, and we use that. And then the grey water treatment plants is something that we are going to roll out in the future. So it's all about conserving the source of what you have. And then it's important to educate people that water is scarce, especially in our environment. But you can, in Cape Town, I had a big scare a few years ago, and they actually managed it by educating people to use less water. The other part that we discussed was in terms of the social housing, whether that is creating a divide. In our particular case, we do not cater for the very low end of the market, but our city benefits from what we do in the sense that they're getting about 30 million rands a year so far already from rates and taxes that we're doing. So, or that we're paying over to the city of Johannesburg. And that assists the city of Johannesburg to take care of some of the responsibilities that they have, and it will grow over time. And we also have reach outs with people in the immediate environment where there are shanty towns or squatter camps, etc., to assist people in those particular areas as well. But it is, I think, it is a bit unrealistic to think that the private sector can fund all of those things. Somewhere you have to get a catalyst to start infrastructure, create jobs, and over time, other people will also benefit from it. Because if you only plan for the very, very low end of the market, there's no return for the investors. So the two has to be working very closely with each other in terms of creating those opportunities.
Thank you very much. Martin, I know we've run out of time, but let's just wind up.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. You tried an answer to your question, and I would say, in principle, I will agree. We have a tension between a huge demand for urbanization, especially for quality cities, and we have a shortage in the supply of such cities. So that creates the conditions for other solutions to appear. But I will not restrict it to only low capacity or failure of government, as you say. Some of the most interesting cases of private cities we have found in China and Vietnam. China and Vietnam are two countries with, I would say, high capacity. If you think of urbanization as a spectrum between cities without slums and slums without cities, China and Vietnam have been much closer to the end of urbanization without slums. And yet, in both cases, they have gone for these partnerships because they have looked for private partners that can bring something additional. So even today, I was in China a couple of weeks ago, you go to Guangzhou and you have Singaporean developers building new cities as part of a general urban development plan because they can bring these new models and this capacity. So it's not only a failure, it's really, as you will do in a market economy, searching for the best solutions. How to make it last and how to address the problems, to me, is an issue where renegotiation and flexibility are extremely important. We are talking about processes that go for decades, where interactions between the two parties, as we had in the example of water, sometimes you need water from the public system. You have discharges of water that will go into public rivers. So you need some mechanisms to address this. You don't know how successful the city will be. A lot of the failures of public-private partnerships have been for not having good mechanisms for renegotiation. So I would say institutional fluidity and the capacity to build a dialogue and to build trust are important. And finally, one word before turning on affordable housing. There are countries that have tried interesting solutions. Indonesia has a regulation for large developers on what percentage of the city has to be affordable. But as Willie was saying, for these deals to work, they need to be profitable for the private actor, interesting for the public actor. If you make them non-profitable for the private actor will not step in. So if you raise the requirements on social housing very high, probably you have to give up on something else so that you still have the interest of the developer. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Peter, close for us on inclusivity.
Yeah, just to kind of follow up on that point regarding making the developments profitable and trying to get in the public housing. In some of the zones that we work with, or one in particular, Sierra Morazan, this has happened already because the business model they have is that there's a large medical supplies company that's the sort of anchor tenant in one of the zones, and this has a lot of blue-collar jobs that are required to service the business. So I guess the way that they have tackled it is sort of twofold. Firstly, they have tried to make the houses good quality but as affordable as possible, and they've done quite a good job really of achieving that. They're not sort of flashy houses, but they are dignified houses. They're in a very safe environment. They're reasonably modest in size, but they've managed to get the rents down there to about $120 per month, which is affordable in Honduras, even for relatively sort of lower middle income people. If you're in a situation where $120 a month isn't affordable, I would say that the sort of second solution to that is to create higher paying jobs. And that's something that private cities, I think, have been reasonably successful at. There are some cases where you're catering for a really sort of high-end knowledge economy, but there are also those kind of blue-collar jobs as well. And we've seen that in sort of both the Honduran studies, case studies that I know best, they have been successful in creating those higher jobs. And certainly in the case of Sierra de Morazan, many families live on site and they're living within decent accommodation. So I think it can happen in the private sector. You just have to kind of be mindful of that and provide the salaries and the low cost accommodation.
Thank you very much. I know we could have more questions. I have a lot, but we need to close that. Let's chat with them over tea and coffee, but let's appreciate the panel for that. Gentlemen, thank you very much.